The bullet tore through the stagecoach wheel just as Zara Ashford realized they were never going to make it to Wilson alive. The coach lurched violently to one side, throwing her against the wooden frame hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Outside, men were shouting, gunfire cracking through the hot Kansas air like thunder on a summer afternoon. The driver's body hit the ground with a sickening thud, and Zara knew with terrible certainty that she was about to die on this dusty road in the middle of nowhere, 300 miles from Boston and everything she had ever known. The year was 1878, and Zara had been traveling west for nearly 2 weeks to meet her uncle in Wilson, Kansas, the last living relative she had in this world. Her father's general store had failed 6 months ago, and he had drunk himself to death by winter. Her mother had followed him to the grave within weeks, her heart simply giving out from grief. At 22 years old, Zara had found herself alone with nothing but debts and the faded letter from an uncle she barely remembered, offering her a position keeping books at his cattle ranch. Now she was going to be robbed and murdered before she ever laid eyes on Wilson. The bandits were circling the coach like wolves. She could see them through the small window, their faces covered with dusty bandanas, their revolvers gleaming in the afternoon sun. The other passengers had already fled into the scrub brush, but Zara's dress had caught on a nail, and by the time she had torn herself free, the bandits were already climbing inside. "Well, well," one of them drawled, his eyes cold above the bandana. "Looks like we got ourselves a pretty little thing here." Zara's hand closed around the derringer her father had given her on her 16th birthday. It was small, barely bigger than her palm, but he had taught her to shoot tin cans off fence posts behind the store. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely keep the barrel steady. "Stay back," she said, her voice coming out higher and thinner than she had intended. The bandit laughed. "Now, darling, you don't want to do nothing foolish." He reached for her and Zara pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, punching a hole through the coach roof instead of the bandit's chest. He lunged forward with a snarl, and Zara threw herself backward, tumbling out the opposite door of the coach. She hit the ground hard, her traveling bag flying open and scattering her few precious belongings across the dirt. Without thinking, she grabbed what she could and ran. The Kansas prairie stretched out in every direction, flat and endless under the burning August sun. Zara ran until her lungs were screaming, and her fashionable Boston boots were rubbing blisters on her heels, ran until the sound of gunfire had faded to nothing but the whisper of wind through dry grass. She ran until her legs simply would not carry her anymore, and then she walked. By nightfall, she had no idea where she was. The road had disappeared hours ago, and she had been following what she hoped was a western trajectory based on the position of the sun. Her water was gone. Her feet were bleeding inside her ruined boots. She had managed to salvage a small canteen, a change of clothes, and the leather portfolio containing her uncle's letter and the deed to her father's failed store, worthless though it was. When the sun rose the next morning, Zara forced herself to keep moving. The landscape had shifted slightly, with rocky outcroppings beginning to break up the endless grass. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Every step sent sharp pains shooting up from her blistered feet. But she kept walking because the alternative was to lie down and die, and she had not come 300 miles to give up now. By midday, she was stumbling more than walking. The sun was merciless, beating down on her head and shoulders with physical force. She had fashioned a makeshift bonnet from her spare petticoat, but it did little to shield her from the heat. Her dark hair, which had started the journey in a neat bun, now hung in tangled waves down her back, heavy with dust and sweat. She had just crested a small rise when her legs finally gave out. She fell to her knees, then forward onto her hands, gasping for breath in the hot air. When she tried to stand again, her body simply refused to obey. Every muscle was screaming. Her vision was starting to blur at the edges. "Get up," she whispered to herself. "Get up, Zara, you have to get up." But she could not. She was too tired to take another step. That was when she heard the horse. At first, she thought it was a mirage, some cruel trick her exhausted mind was playing on her. But the sound of hoofbeats on hard earth was too real, too steady. She managed to lift her head, squinting against the sun. The rider was tall in the saddle, his broad-brimmed hat casting his face in shadow. He pulled his horse to a stop about 10 feet away and sat there for a moment, studying her with an intensity she could feel even though she could not see his eyes. "Please," Zara managed to croak out. "Water." The rider dismounted in one smooth motion and approached her slowly, carefully, the way someone might approach a wounded animal. When he crouched down beside her, she finally got a good look at his face. He was young, probably no more than 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue and startling against his sun-bronzed skin. They were the kind of eyes that seemed to see right through a person, but there was kindness in them too and concern. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady. He pulled a canteen from his belt and held it to her lips. "Just a little at first. Too much will make you sick." The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but it was the most glorious thing Zara had ever experienced. She wanted to gulp it down, to drain the entire canteen in one go, but he pulled it away after just a few sips. "What in the name of God are you doing out here alone?" he asked, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting to see someone following her. "Stagecoach," Zara managed. "Robbers, I ran." His expression darkened. "How long ago?" "Yesterday, maybe longer, I do not know." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, her bleeding hands, her ruined boots. Then he stood and walked back to his horse, returning with a wet cloth that he pressed gently to her forehead and the back of her neck. "My name is Preston Hayes," he said. "I've got a ranch about 7 miles west of here. Can you ride?" Zara tried to stand, but her legs would not support her weight. She collapsed back to her knees with a small cry of pain and frustration. Preston caught her before she could fall completely. "All right," he said quietly. "All right." "New plan." He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing at all, cradling her against his chest. Zara was too exhausted to protest, too grateful to be ashamed. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, could smell dust and leather and something else, something clean and masculine that made her feel oddly safe despite their circumstances. 7 miles, he said, carrying her toward his horse. "I will have you there before dark." But the horse seemed to sense that something was wrong. It shied away nervously when Preston tried to mount while holding Zara, dancing sideways and tossing its head. After the third attempt, Preston made a frustrated sound and set Zara down gently against a rock. "Sorry, girl," he said to the horse, running a hand down its neck. "You have had a long day too, have you not?" He stood there for a moment, considering their options. Then he turned back to Zara with a look of quiet determination. "Can you hold on to my back?" he asked. Zara blinked at him in confusion. "I am going to carry you," Preston said simply. "It is not that far. 7 miles. I have carried heavier loads." "You cannot," Zara protested weakly. 7 miles is impossible. Watch me." He lifted her again, this time settling her more securely against him so that her arms were wrapped around his neck and her legs around his waist. It should have been scandalous, this intimate proximity to a strange man, but Zara found she did not care. She was too tired to care about propriety. Preston started walking, leading his horse by the reins with one hand while his other arm supported Zara's weight. His stride was long and steady, eating up the ground with practiced ease. The horse followed docilely behind them, apparently more comfortable with this arrangement. For the first hour, Zara kept expecting him to stop to set her down, to admit that this was madness. But he kept walking without complaint, his breathing steady and even. She could feel the muscles in his shoulders and back working beneath his shirt, could feel the heat of the sun beating down on both of them. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, her voice barely more than a whisper against his ear. "Because you need help," Preston said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And because leaving you out here would make me the kind of man I am not interested in being. You do not even know me. Does that matter?" It was such a strange question that Zara did not know how to answer it. In Boston, everything had been about knowing people, about connections and social standing and who your family was. Out here, apparently, the rules were different. As they walked, Preston told her about his ranch. It was small, just him and 3 hired hands and about 200 head of cattle. His father had started it back in 1869, right after the war, but he had died 2 years ago when his horse threw him during a storm. Preston's mother had passed when he was young, too young to remember her properly. He had inherited the ranch at 24 and had been working himself to the bone ever since, trying to keep it running. "It is good land," he said, his voice warm with pride. "Good water, good grass. The cattle are healthy. We made enough last year to buy another 100 acres to the south. Another few years and we will have one of the biggest operations in this part of Kansas." "And you do all this with just 3 men?" Zara asked. "We do what needs doing," Preston said. "Out here, you either work hard or you do not survive. There is not much in between." The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when Zara felt Preston's steps begin to slow slightly. Not stopping, not complaining, but she could feel the tension in his shoulders now, could hear the slight change in his breathing. He had been walking for nearly 3 hours carrying her full weight and he had to be exhausted. "Please," she said, "you can set me down, I can try to walk again." "We are almost there," Preston said. "See that rise ahead? The ranch is just beyond it." But Zara could see the way his jaw was set, could feel the tremor in his arms that he was trying to hide. She pressed her face against his shoulder, overcome with a confusing mixture of gratitude and guilt, and something else she could not quite name. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Preston." She felt more than heard his response, a low rumble in his chest. "Nothing to thank me for yet. Let us get you inside and cleaned up first." True to his word, the ranch came into view as they crested the rise. It was not large, just a main house, a barn, a few outbuildings and a network of corrals, but it looked like paradise to Zara's exhausted eyes. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and she could see a man working near the barn who looked up in surprise as they approached. "Boss." The man called out, jogging over to meet them. He was older, maybe 50, with graying hair and a weather-beaten face. "What in the world happened?" "Found her about 7 miles east," Preston said, his voice rougher now with fatigue. "Stagecoach was attacked. She has been walking since yesterday with no water." The older man whistled low. "That was the Wilson stage then. We heard there had been trouble. Come on, let us get her inside." Preston carried Zara up the steps to the main house, through a door that the older man held open, and into a room that was blessedly cool and dim after the harsh sunlight. He set her down carefully on a worn leather sofa, and Zara saw him wince slightly as he straightened, rolling his shoulders. "Charlie," Preston said to the older man, "can you ride into Wilson and fetch Doc Brennan? Tell him we have got someone who needs looking at." "Right away, boss." Charlie disappeared back outside, and moments later Zara heard the sound of hoofbeats galloping away. Preston knelt beside the sofa, studying Zara's face with those intense blue eyes. "How are you feeling? Any dizziness?" "Nausea. Just tired," Zara said, "and thirsty." He fetched her another cup of water, watching carefully to make sure she drank it slowly. Then he brought a basin of cool water and clean cloths, and began carefully cleaning the dirt and blood from her hands and face. His touch was gentle, almost tender, and Zara found herself studying his face as he worked. There were fine lines at the corners of his eyes, put there by years of squinting into the sun. A small scar cut through his left eyebrow, barely visible unless you were close enough to see it. His hands were calloused and work roughened, but they moved with surprising delicacy as he tended to her cuts and scrapes. "I am going to have to look at your feet," he said finally, his voice apologetic. "Those boots need to come off." Zara nodded, too exhausted to feel embarrassed. Preston worked the ruined boots off as carefully as he could, but she still gasped in pain when the leather pulled away from her blistered skin. Her stockings were stuck to her feet with dried blood. Preston's expression hardened. "We are going to need to soak these off," he said quietly. "It is going to hurt, but it will hurt worse if we try to peel them away dry." He disappeared into another room and returned with a larger basin filled with warm water. Zara bit her lip to keep from crying out as he lowered her feet into the water, the pain sharp and immediate. Preston's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "I know," he said softly. "I know it hurts, but you are doing great. Another minute and the worst will be over." They sat like that, his hand wrapped around hers until the stockings had soaked enough to be removed. Preston worked with infinite patience, peeling the fabric away bit by bit, cleaning each wound as he exposed it. By the time he was finished, tears were streaming down Zara's face, but she had not made a sound. "You are tougher than you look," Preston said, something like admiration in his voice. He wrapped her feet in clean bandages, then sat back on his heels. "The doctor will probably want to check for infection, but I think you will be all right. You did good out there. A lot of people would not have survived what you went through." "I almost did not," Zara admitted. "If you had not found me when you did." "But I did find you," Preston said firmly. "And you are safe now. That is what matters." There was a long moment of silence between them, charged with something Zara could not quite define. Preston was still holding her hand, his thumb absently tracing small circles on her palm. His eyes were searching her face as if trying to memorize every detail. The spell was broken by the sound of horses outside. Preston released her hand and stood, moving to the door. Charlie had returned with the doctor, a short, balding man with a kind face and a black medical bag. Dr. Brennan examined Zara thoroughly, cleaning and re-bandaging her feet, checking her for signs of heat sickness and dehydration. He pronounced her exhausted and battered but fundamentally sound, prescribed rest and plenty of water, and left her with a bottle of laudanum in case the pain in her feet kept her from sleeping. After the doctor left, Preston stood awkwardly in the doorway of his own house, as if unsure what to do next. "You should get some sleep," he said finally. "You can have my room. I will bunk with the boys tonight." "I cannot take your room," Zara protested. "Yes, you can. I insist." He crossed to a door on the far side of the main room and pushed it open, revealing a simple bedroom with a large bed covered in a patchwork quilt. "There is a pitcher of water on the dresser and some clean shirts in the top drawer if you want something more comfortable to sleep in. I will bring you some supper in a bit." He started to leave, then paused. "Miss Ashford, I am glad I found you today. I am glad you are all right." Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him, and Zara was alone for the first time since the attack. She looked around the room, taking in the simple furnishings, the few personal items on the dresser. This was Preston's private space, and he had given it to her without hesitation. She found one of his shirts in the drawer, soft flannel that smelled like soap and sunshine. After struggling out of her filthy, torn dress, she pulled the shirt on. It fell nearly to her knees, the sleeves hanging past her hands. She climbed into the bed and was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. She woke to darkness and the smell of food. A lamp had been lit on the bedside table, turned low, and there was a tray on the dresser with a bowl of stew, fresh bread, and a glass of milk. Preston must have brought it in while she slept. The thoughtfulness of it brought fresh tears to her eyes. Zara ate slowly, savoring every bite. The stew was simple but good, rich with beef and vegetables. When she was finished, she set the tray aside and lay back down, staring at the ceiling in the lamplight. What was she going to do now? Her uncle's ranch was somewhere near Wilson, but she had no way to get there. She had lost everything in the attack, except for the few items she had managed to grab. She had no money, no resources, no way to repay Preston for his kindness. The thought of leaving this place, of leaving him, sent an unexpected pang through her chest. Which was ridiculous, she told herself firmly. She had known the man for all of 6 hours. She could not possibly have developed feelings for him in such a short time. But she could still feel the solid warmth of his arms around her, could still hear the steady sound of his voice as he talked to her during that long walk. She could still see the concern in his blue eyes, the gentleness in his touch as he tended her wounds. Zara blew out the lamp and pulled the quilt up to her chin, breathing in the faint scent of Preston that clung to the fabric. Tomorrow she would figure out what to do next. Tonight, she would simply be grateful to be alive and safe. She woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of male voices outside. Her feet were still painful, but the sharp agony had faded to a dull throb. She found her dress had been washed and mended, left folded neatly on a chair by the door. Someone, probably Preston, had sewn up the tears with careful, even stitches. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Preston in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up as she entered, and something warm and pleased flickered across his face. "Morning," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Zara said. "Much better, actually. Thank you for washing my dress." "That was not me," Preston admitted. "Charlie's wife, Maria, came by early this morning. She lives in Wilson but helps out here sometimes. She said to tell you she would be back this afternoon to check on you properly." He poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured for Zara to sit at the rough wooden table. The kitchen was simple but clean, with morning light pouring through the windows. Preston set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her, along with more of that good bread from the night before. "I sent one of the boys into Wilson this morning to ask around about your uncle," Preston said, sitting down across from her. "Name was Ashford, you said?" "Yes. Daniel Ashford. He wrote that he had a cattle ranch near Wilson, but I do not know exactly where." Preston was quiet for a moment, his expression troubled. "Miss Ashford, I do not know how to tell you this gently, so I am just going to say it plain. Daniel Ashford died 3 months ago. Heart gave out one night in his sleep. His ranch was sold to pay his debts." Zara set down her fork very carefully, her hands shaking. "But that is impossible. I have his letter. It is dated from May." "May was 4 months ago," Preston said gently. "The letter must have taken a while to reach you and then travel time on top of that. I am sorry. I know you came a long way." Zara felt the room tilt slightly around her. Her uncle was dead. The ranch was gone. She had come all this way, had survived bandits and exposure and nearly dying in the desert, and it had all been for nothing. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, nothing. Miss Ashford. Preston's voice seemed to come from very far away. Zara, stay with me now. Just breathe. His hand was warm on her shoulder, grounding her. She focused on that touch, on the solid reality of it, until the dizziness passed. "What am I going to do?" she whispered. Preston pulled his chair closer, his blue eyes serious. "First, you are going to finish your breakfast. Then we are going to figure this out together. You are not alone in this, all right? I promise you that." "You barely know me," Zara said, echoing her words from the day before. "Does that matter?" Preston said, echoing his own response. Then he smiled just a little. "Besides, anyone tough enough to survive what you have been through is worth knowing better." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Maria came by each morning to help Zara with bathing and dressing, clucking over her like a mother hen. She was a warm, round woman in her 50s with knowing eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She brought fresh bandages for Zara's feet and a pair of worn but serviceable boots that had belonged to her daughter. "She moved to Topeka last year," Maria explained. "Married a railroad man. She will not be needing these anymore." Zara's feet healed slowly but steadily. By the end of the first week, she could walk around the house without wincing. By the end of the second, she was helping Maria with cooking and cleaning, unable to sit idle while others worked around her. Preston watched this transformation with quiet approval. He was gone most days from dawn until dusk, riding the range with his men, checking on the cattle, mending fences. But in the evenings, he would return to the house dusty and exhausted, and they would sit together over supper and talk. Zara learned that he had fought in the war when he was just 16, lying about his age to join up. He did not talk much about what he had seen, but she could see shadows in his eyes sometimes that spoke of hard memories. After the war, he had come west with his father, looking for a fresh start. "Pa always said the land out here was healing," Preston told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. "Said a man could make something of himself if he was willing to work for it. I think he was right about that." "Do you ever miss the East?" Zara asked. Preston considered this. "Sometimes I miss the trees, the green. Out here, everything is browns and golds except for a few weeks in spring. But I would not trade this for anything. This land gets in your blood." Zara understood what he meant. There was something about the vast openness of the prairie, the endless sky, that spoke to something deep inside her. In Boston, she had felt trapped, hemmed in by buildings and expectations and the weight of her parents' failures. Out here, she felt like she could breathe. As the weeks passed, Zara found herself looking forward to Preston's returns each evening with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. She would catch herself listening for the sound of his horse, would feel her heart skip when she heard his boots on the porch steps. And she was not alone in this. She had seen the way Preston's eyes would search for her the moment he entered the house, the way his whole face would light up when he found her. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Preston came home earlier than usual and found Zara in the barn. She had discovered a litter of barn cats and had been visiting them daily, charmed by the tiny kittens. "They are so small," she said, cradling one in her hands. It was orange and white, no bigger than her palm, and it mewed pitifully as she stroked its soft fur. Preston leaned against the stall door, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "That one is the runt," he said. "Mother has been ignoring it. It probably will not make it." "Then I will take care of it," Zara said firmly. She tucked the kitten into her apron pocket where it curled up and went immediately to sleep. Preston smiled. "You have got a soft heart, Zara Ashford." "Is that a bad thing?" "No," he said quietly. "No, I think it might be the best thing about you, and that is saying something." Their eyes met across the dim barn, and Zara felt something shift between them. The air seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken words. Preston took a step forward, then another, until he was standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Zara," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw and terrifying. Zara's breath caught in her throat. "You barely know me," she whispered, but there was no conviction in it now. "I know enough," Preston said. "I know you are brave and stubborn and kind. I know you have got strength most people will never understand. I know that when I carried you those 7 miles, I felt like I was carrying something precious. And I know that every day since then, I have been looking for excuses to be near you." "Preston," Zara breathed. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his calloused hand. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, gentle as a whisper. "Tell me I am not alone in this," he said. "Tell me you feel it too." "I do," Zara admitted, the words tumbling out of her like a confession. "I feel it. I think about you constantly. When you are gone during the day, I find myself counting the hours until you return. And when you are here, I feel like I can finally breathe properly again." Preston made a sound low in his throat, something between a laugh and a groan. Then he was kissing her, and Zara was kissing him back, the kitten in her pocket temporarily forgotten. His lips were warm and slightly chapped, and he tasted like coffee and something uniquely him. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but when Zara wound her arms around his neck and pressed closer, it deepened into something more urgent. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Zara pulled back slightly, her eyes wide. "What? Marry me," Preston repeated. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a month, but Zara, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build something with you. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." Tears were spilling down Zara's cheeks now, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Preston, I will marry you." He kissed her again, and this time there was joy in it and promise. The kitten in Zara's pocket chose that moment to mew loudly in protest at being squished between them, and they broke apart laughing. "We are going to need to work on your timing, little one," Preston told the kitten, gently extracting it from Zara's pocket. It climbed up his shirt and perched on his shoulder, purring loudly. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Wilson, with Maria and Charlie and the ranch hands as witnesses. Zara wore a dress that had belonged to Maria's daughter, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried wildflowers that Preston had ridden out at dawn to pick for her. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Preston kissed her with such tenderness that Maria dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. The ranch hands had prepared a celebration back at the house, with a fiddle player from town and more food than seemed possible. They danced in the yard under the stars, and Preston held Zara close and told her he loved her, and she believed him with every fiber of her being. That night, in the bedroom that was now truly theirs, Preston carried her across the threshold despite her laughing protests. He set her down carefully and cupped her face in his hands. "I know this is not what you expected when you came west," he said quietly. "I know this life is hard. The work never ends and there is no guarantee we will make it. But I promise you, Zara, I will spend every day trying to make you happy. I will love you and protect you and stand beside you through whatever comes." "I know," Zara said, pressing her hand over his heart. "I trust you, Preston, completely." They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with patience and care. Preston was gentle, mindful of her inexperience, and when she cried out his name in pleasure, he held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, skin against skin, hearts beating in sync. "Tell me something," Preston said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "That day I found you when you were too tired to take another step. Did you really think you were going to die?" "Yes," Zara admitted. "I had given up. I had decided to just lie down and let it happen." Preston's arms tightened around her. "I cannot imagine this world without you in it now. The thought of almost losing you before I even met you, it makes my chest hurt." "But you did not lose me," Zara said, tilting her head to kiss his jaw. "You carried me those last 7 miles and saved my life. You gave me everything I needed exactly when I needed it most." "You did the same for me," Preston said quietly. "I just did not know I needed saving until you showed up." The first year of their marriage was hard work but filled with simple joys. Zara proved to have a head for numbers and took over the ranch books, organizing their finances in a way that allowed them to see clearly where they were making and losing money. With her help, they were able to negotiate better prices in Wilson and even started selling directly to buyers in Kansas City. The little orange and white kitten, which Zara had named Jasper, grew into a massive tomcat who ruled the barn with an iron paw. Preston claimed he had never seen so many mice leave so quickly. Maria taught Zara how to cook properly, how to preserve food for the winter, how to make soap and candles and all the other necessities of ranch life. Charlie taught her to ride, patiently walking beside her horse until she got comfortable in the saddle. Within 6 months, she could ride well enough to accompany Preston when he checked on the cattle in the near pastures. They made love often, in the big bed at night and sometimes during the day when Preston came in for lunch and found her alone in the house. He would kiss her breathless against the kitchen table, and she would pull him into their bedroom, and they would lose themselves in each other while the sun streamed through the windows. In the spring of 1879, Zara discovered she was pregnant. Preston's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy, then immediately set her down carefully as if she might break. "Are you all right?" he asked anxiously. "Should you be standing? Should you sit down?" "Do you need anything?" Zara laughed and pulled him down for a kiss. "I am fine. I am going to be fine. We are going to have a baby, Preston." His hand moved to her still flat stomach, his eyes full of wonder. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby." The pregnancy was not easy. Zara was sick most mornings for the first 3 months, and Preston would hold her hair back and rub her back and look completely helpless. But she was healthy and strong, and by her 2nd trimester, she was feeling well enough to return to her normal activities. Preston became impossibly protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy or ride anymore or do any of the harder chores. Zara bore this with patient amusement, knowing it came from love even when it drove her to distraction. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening when he had insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that probably weighed 5 pounds. "I know," Preston said, "but you are carrying the most important thing in the world to me, and I will be damned if I am going to take any chances." Their son was born on a cold November morning in 1879, with Maria attending as midwife. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Preston, waiting anxiously in the other room, thought he might go mad from worry. But when he finally heard his son's first cry, strong and healthy, he dropped to his knees in relief. Maria emerged to find him with his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "You can come meet him now," she said gently. Preston found Zara propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing with a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he entered, and the smile she gave him was radiant. "Come meet your son," she said. Preston approached slowly, almost reverently. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and impossibly tiny fingers. As Preston watched, Those little fingers curled around his own, and he felt something in his chest crack open. "He is perfect," Preston whispered. "You are perfect. God, Zara, I love you so much." They named him Thomas Daniel, after Preston's father and Zara's uncle. Tommy, as they quickly began calling him, was a healthy, hungry baby who demanded attention at all hours. Preston would walk him at night when he was fussy, pacing the floor with his son against his shoulder, humming old songs his father had taught him, watching her husband with their son. Seeing the gentleness and patience Preston showed, Zara fell in love with him all over again. The years that followed were full and busy. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. They hired more men, expanded their herds, bought more land. Tommy grew into a sturdy toddler who followed his father everywhere, mimicking his walk and his mannerisms. Preston was endlessly patient with him, answering his endless questions and teaching him about the cattle and the land. In the spring of 1882, Zara discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a healthy daughter in December. They named her Sarah Marie, and she had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. Preston wept when he held his daughter for the first time, overwhelmed by the perfection of her tiny features. "Another miracle," he said to Zara. "How did I get so lucky?" "We got lucky," Zara corrected him, reaching up to wipe the tears from his face. "Both of us." By 1885, they had 3 children. Their youngest, a boy they named James, was born in the spring of that year. The house they had added onto twice was filled with noise and laughter and the controlled chaos of a growing family. Tommy was 6 now, serious and responsible like his father, already learning to rope and ride. Sarah was 3, fearless and wild, constantly getting into mischief. And baby James was sweet-tempered and cuddly, content to be passed from person to person. On warm evenings after the children were in bed, Preston and Zara would sit on the porch together watching the sunset, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "Do you ever miss Boston?" Preston asked one evening. Zara considered this. "Sometimes I miss certain things, libraries, theater, the ocean, but no, I do not miss the life I had there. This is home now, you are home." Preston kissed the top of her head. "Do you ever think about that day I found you, about how close we came to never meeting at all?" "Sometimes," Zara admitted. "But then I think about everything that had to happen for us to find each other. The stagecoach attack, as terrible as it was. My uncle's death. All the awful things that brought me to that exact spot at that exact time, and I think maybe it was all meant to be." "Maybe it was," Preston agreed. "Or maybe we just got impossibly lucky." "Does it matter which?" Preston smiled against her hair. "No, I suppose it does not." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out one by one. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing and the call of a night bird. The air smelled like grass and dust and coming rain. "Preston," Zara said quietly. "Thank you for carrying me those last 7 miles. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for saving my life in every way that matters." Preston turned her in his arms so he could look at her properly. In the fading light, she could see all the years between them written on his face, the lines around his eyes deeper now, his jaw shaded with stubble that was starting to show hints of gray. But his eyes were the same, that startling blue that had caught her attention that very first day. "You saved me right back," he said simply. "I was half alive before you came along, going through the motions. You made me whole again, Zara. You gave me a reason to build something that would last. You gave me a family and a future and more happiness than I ever thought possible. So thank you. For saying yes when I found you, for trusting me, for loving me, for choosing to build this life with me." Zara kissed him then, slow and sweet, pouring everything she felt into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling, she could hear one of the children stirring inside. "Duty calls," she said with a laugh. "Always does," Preston agreed. But he caught her hand before she could go inside, holding her there for just a moment longer. "I love you, Zara Hayes, more every day." "I love you too," Zara said. "Always." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when the cattle struggled and dry summers when the grass turned brown and they worried about water. There were good years when the calves were healthy and the prices were high and they made enough to start saving for the children's futures. There were illnesses and injuries and the thousand small crises that came with raising a family and running a ranch. Through it all, Preston and Zara faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. They taught their children the value of hard work and honesty and treating people fairly. They taught them to love the land and respect it, to understand that everything they had was earned through sweat and determination. Tommy grew into a young man who looked so much like his father it was startling, with the same blue eyes and quiet strength. He took to ranching naturally, and by his 16th birthday was managing entire sections of the operation on his own. Sarah became a skilled rider who could rope a calf as well as any of the hands, much to her father's pride and occasional consternation. James was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book, talking about maybe becoming a lawyer or a doctor someday. "Let him dream," Zara told Preston when he worried about James not taking to ranch work the way Tommy had. "The world needs more than just ranchers." "I know," Preston said. "I just want them all to be happy, to find what they are meant to do." "They will," Zara assured him. "We raised them right. They will find their way." In 1895, on their 16th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Zara with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children in Maria's capable care and took the train west. And for 2 weeks, they were just Preston and Zara again, without the responsibilities of ranch and family. They stayed in a grand hotel, dined in fancy restaurants, walked along the waterfront hand in hand like newlyweds. Preston bought Zara a beautiful gold locket and had their wedding date engraved inside. Zara bought Preston a pocket watch with his initials etched on the case. On their last night in the city, they stood on their hotel balcony overlooking the bay, watching ships come and go in the harbor. "This has been wonderful," Zara said, leaning back against Preston's chest as his arms came around her. "But I am ready to go home." "Me too," Preston admitted. "I miss the kids, I miss the ranch, I miss the sound of nothing but wind and cattle." Zara laughed. "We are getting old, Preston Hayes." "Maybe," he agreed. "But I would not change a single thing, not one moment of this life we have built together." They returned home to find the ranch running smoothly and the children happy to see them. That night, lying in their own bed, Preston pulled Zara close and kissed her temple. "17 years ago," he said quietly, "I found a woman dying in the desert. I carried her 7 miles and thought I was just doing the right thing. I had no idea I was carrying my entire future in my arms. I was too tired to take another step," Zara remembered. "And you carried me without complaint. You have been carrying me ever since in one way or another." "That is not true," Preston protested. "You have carried me just as much, maybe more." "Then we carry each other," Zara said. "That is what marriage is it not? Taking turns carrying each other when the load gets too heavy." "I suppose it is," Preston agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Do you remember what I told you that night, after we were married? You said you would spend every day trying to make me happy," Zara said. "You said you would love me and protect me and stand beside me through whatever came." "Have I done that?" Preston asked. "Have I kept that promise?" Zara turned in his arms to face him, You have exceeded it in every possible way. You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams, Preston. You have given me a home and a family and more love than I knew existed in the world. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." "Good," Preston said, relief evident in his voice. "Good, because I plan on spending the next 50 years making sure that never changes." "Only 50?" Zara teased. Preston laughed. "All right, the next 100 years. How is that better?" Zara said and kissed him. As the 19th century drew to a close and a new one began, the Hayes Ranch continued to thrive. Tommy married a sweet schoolteacher from Wilson in 1898 and brought her home to the ranch, where Preston and Zara welcomed her with open arms. They built Tommy and his bride a house on the far side of the property, and within a year, Zara and Preston became grandparents to a baby girl they named Emily. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Preston looked at Zara with wonder in his eyes. "Can you believe this?" he said. "We made this. Not just her, but this whole family, this whole life." "We did," Zara agreed, her own arms full with the baby. "And it is beautiful." Sarah announced in 1900 that she was moving to Denver to attend business school, shocking the family but making them proud. James went to medical school in St. Louis, writing home faithfully every week about his studies and his plans to return to Kansas to practice once he graduated. As their children grew and went their separate ways, Preston and Zara found themselves back where they had started, just the two of them in the big house. But it was not lonely. Tommy and his growing family visited often, and there were always ranch hands around. Sarah came home twice a year, full of stories about the city. James returned for holidays, bringing with him books and new ideas. In 1905, on a warm summer evening much like the one when they had first sat on this porch together, Preston and Zara celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary. They were both grayer now, with lines on their faces that spoke of years of sun and work and laughter. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been, too. "I have been thinking," Preston said as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "About what?" Zara asked. "About selling the ranch to Tommy, retiring, maybe traveling some, seeing the country while we are still young enough to enjoy it." Zara considered this. "Are you sure? This place has been your whole life." "No," Preston corrected gently. "You have been my whole life. The ranch was just the setting, and I think I am ready to see what else the world has to offer, as long as I am seeing it with you." They sold the ranch to Tommy the following spring, though they kept the main house and the surrounding few acres. Tommy was ready for the responsibility, and he had good ideas about how to modernize certain operations. Preston found he did not mind stepping back as much as he thought he would. Over the next few years, Preston and Zara traveled extensively. They visited Sarah in Denver and were charmed by the bustling city she had made her home. They spent a month with James in St. Louis, where he had opened a successful practice. They took trains to New York and Chicago, to New Orleans and Seattle. They saw mountains and oceans and cities that seemed to stretch on forever. But they always came back to Kansas, to the little house on the property that had been their home for nearly 3 decades. Because no matter how beautiful the rest of the world was, this would always be where their hearts lived. In 1912, Preston fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. For weeks, he lingered in bed, burning with fever, and Zara refused to leave his side. She sat with him day and night, bathing his face with cool cloths, holding his hand, talking to him even when he was too delirious to respond. The children came home, gathering around their father's bedside with worried faces. But Zara would not let them give up hope. "He is the strongest man I know," she told them fiercely. He once carried me 7 miles when I was too tired to walk. He does not know how to quit. And somehow, impossibly, Preston pulled through. The fever broke one morning in early February, and he woke to find Zara asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand still holding his. He squeezed her fingers gently, and her eyes opened. "Hey there," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Zara's face crumpled with relief. "You scared me," she whispered. "You scared me so badly, Preston." "Sorry," he said. "I am not going anywhere yet. We still have too much to do." It took months for Preston to fully recover, but recover he did. By summer, he was back on his feet, thinner and weaker than before, but very much alive. He and Zara spent long afternoons on the porch, him reading while she worked on her embroidery, content in each other's presence. "I have been thinking," Preston said one afternoon. "Again," Zara teased. "That is becoming a dangerous habit." Preston smiled. "I was thinking about that day I found you, about how you were too tired to take another step and I carried you the last 7 miles. Do you remember what you asked me?" "I asked you why you were doing it," Zara said. "And you said because I needed help, and because leaving me there would make you the kind of man you were not interested in being." "That was true," Preston said, "but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth is that the moment I saw you lying there in the dust, something in me recognized something in you. Like my soul knew it had found its mate, even if my mind had not caught up yet. I would have carried you 1,000 miles if that was what it took." "Preston Hayes," Zara said, setting down her embroidery. "Are you getting sentimental in your old age?" "Maybe I am," Preston admitted, "but I figure I have earned the right. It has been a good life, Zara, a really good life, and it has all been because of you." Zara moved to sit beside him, curling into his side the way she had 1,000 times before. "Because of us," she corrected. "We built this together, remember? We carried each other." "We carried each other," Preston agreed. They sat like that until the sun went down and the stars came out. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life that neither had dreamed possible. Two people who had learned that sometimes salvation came not from where you expected, but from a stranger on a dusty road who refused to leave you behind. Two people who had proven that love, real love, was not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about carrying each other when the load got too heavy. It was about choosing each other every single day, through sickness and health, through good times and bad, through all the ordinary moments that made up a life. Preston and Zara lived the rest of their days in that little house on the edge of the prairie, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. They grew old together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing, but their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. When Preston died peacefully in his sleep in 1928 at the age of 75, Zara was beside him, holding his hand just as she had held it through 50 years of marriage. She lived 3 more years without him, surrounded by the family they had built together, before joining him in the small cemetery outside Wilson. Their grandchildren would tell their own children the story of how Preston and Zara met, about the day a cowboy found a woman dying in the desert and carried her 7 miles to safety, about how that act of kindness had blossomed into a love that had lasted a lifetime and created a legacy that would endure for generations. It became a family legend, the story of the woman who was too tired to take another step and the cowboy who carried her without complaint. The story of how sometimes, when you are at your lowest point, when you think you cannot go on, salvation appears in the most unexpected form. The story of how love is not about perfection or fairy tales, but about two imperfect people who choose to carry each other through whatever life brings. And in the end, that was the greatest love story of all.